Hi, do you work here?
Sure do.
I got a question about these bullets. These bullets are 20 cents a piece more than these bullets. Is it going to make that big of a difference?
Those cheap bullets are so inaccurate, they're not really safe.
What the fuck? Old man Taylor, coming to you again from the reloading bench. Today's topic is going to be performance versus economy. As we're hand loading, we're faced with a lot of decisions that we've got to make. One of the largest decisions we have to make is how much are we going to spend to make that cartridge, and what are the expectations for that performance. Now, I've been on the internet lately and I've seen some things. I've seen some discussions going on about you're using the wrong brass, you're using the wrong bullets, you're using the wrong powder. That's why you're not getting the results that you want. So the question came up in my mind, how important is each one of those components? How much is that actually costing me in performance versus dollars? All right, so what I've decided to do today, I've got a standard. I've got an old faithful, if you will, in 308. We're going to be loading for 308. I'm going to fire these at the range in 10 shot groups, and we're going to compare changing one variable all the way through and then putting that all together for the most economical round versus our control, our standard. All right, so that's going to be the process. We'll have 5 groups that we're going to load of 10 shots each. All right, for our control, our first load, this particular round, what we're going to load is kind of a standard. This is not necessarily the most accurate round that there is. It's not the most accurate round for your rifle potentially, but it is a known, proven good round. This particular cartridge is the one the U.S. military has been using in their 308 sniper rifles for 70 years-ish. It's one can't parry in the past. Some things have developed and created some better things today, but it's a very solid performing round. And that is going to be Sierra Match Kings 168s with Lapua brass over IMR 4895 gunpowder. That's going to be our standard. I'm going to use the exact same loading process, and we'll go through that for each particular load that we're making, and we're going to vary one variable only in that setup. In this particular setup, the second string that we're going to load, we're going to use Winchester brass instead of Lapua. We'll go ahead and keep our Sierra Match King. We'll keep our 4895 and just see what is the difference basically in this particular load in this rifle for just changing out the Lapua, right? I can pick up Winchester on the range for free, right? So I can save some money there, all right? Then our next string that we'll load and fire, we're gonna run some factory second bullets. All right, these bullets, I picked these up from Midway. Very inexpensive, less than half the cost of the projectile. They're listed as match grade ammunition, seconds, and I don't know for sure who the manufacturer is, but when I measure my ogive and my links and my weights, they match my Sierra Match Kings. So I think that's going to be a pretty fair performance, even if they're not really Sierra Match Kings. I think that's possible. I believe Sierra is right down the road from Midway, so maybe something's going on there. But these came out to around 22 cents a projectile versus nearly 50 cents a projectile over here. So that's a significant savings if they work, right? So we'll load those with our Lapua brass. We're going to load those with IMR 4895, and we're only going to change the projectile. Now, one thing about those projectiles, I did weigh them, and these are all exactly 168.0. There was some deviation in there, and that may have been why they were seconds. But these will be, dead on, and you can do that too. I buy 300 of these at a time, weigh them out into heavy, medium, and light, and we'll see how that performs, how that stacks up. And then the next thing that I want to do is the powder, right? So IMR 4895 is a great gunpowder in 308. It's actually a great gunpowder for a lot of cartridges. One of the downsides of it is not only its price, it is fairly expensive. It doesn't meter particularly well through a manual volume style gunpowder dropper, right? So for precision rounds, I have to hand trickle 4895. Well, there's another gunpowder that was developed specifically for 308 and heavy cartridges in 223, which are the two things I tend to load with these two gunpowders. That's TAC, Ramshot, significantly less cost. It's also a ball powder, so it meters really well through my powder thrower. So well, in fact, I have hand loaded these. I have trickle charged these, and I find that I really don't have to trickle charge much to get really, really accurate throws. They come pretty much within 1/10 of a grain. Plus or minus 1/10, right? So pretty dang close. So if I can get this, not only am I going to save about 20 cents a bullet in gunpowder, yeah, that much for a completed cartridge, but I can also do it very fast. I can throw it. So huge advantage. If the TAC works, we're going to run the TAC with the exact same Lapua brass. We're going to run that with the Sierra Match Kings, and the only thing we're going to change is the TAC, so we can get a comparison there. And then the last load that I'm going to load, I'm going to put it all together. I'm going to use Winchester. This is range brass that has been fired in my rifle one time, so it has been fireform. I'm going to run the Midway seconds, the 168.0s, and I'm going to load that with TAC. And I'm going to shoot 10 round groups, right? Big question there. 3s and 5s, kind of what we've always done. Statistically, it really doesn't get interesting until we've shot more than maybe 20 or 30. I'm not going to go to that extreme. But 10 should give us a pretty solid idea of what these groups are going to look like. They're obviously all going to open up. When I go from 3s to 5s, my groups tend to get bigger. When I go 5 to 10, they're going to get bigger. They're going to give us a truer expectation of what we can expect shot to shot to shot. That's why I chose 10. It's economical to do. It's reasonable. And even though it's not as scientific, statistically as significant as 20 or 30, it is far more significant than, say, 5. It's going to get us in that 85% certainty range, something in that range, which will be pretty accurate. So what's going to be the difference in cost as we go through here? Well, I just did the math on what I paid for these components, and this completed cartridge with the best stuff that I can get for it is about $1.06 is my cost. All right, and that's factoring that Lapua brass, assuming I'm going to shoot it about 10 times. And your experience may vary there, whether you're annealing, how hot you're loading them, how loose your chamber is. All those things will determine whether you can get 10. You may get 20, right? But you may get 6 or 7. So just know that that's the math that I'm doing. That gives me about $0.10 a piece on these for the brass, whereas my Winchester, like I said, are range pickups. So that's free. Okay, so I'm about $1.06 here. When I get all the way down here, I'm just under 60 cents a cartridge, a completed cartridge. So that is substantial. That is a significant difference. It's not half, but it's close to half the price, right? And if you're watching this video in the future and the dollar is now worth a quarter, understand that if I was to buy a completed cartridge of this, the Federals that are running Sierra Match Kings, that premium ammo, it's over $2 a bullet right now. I can find it on sale for about $1.90. Something like that, but normally it's about 2 1/4. So $1.06 versus 2 1/4. If I can just match that performance, I'm way ahead economically. But I'm pretty confident we can beat that performance by tailoring this to the rifle a little bit better. So I'll get a better cartridge for less. Meanwhile, my white box, my Winchester white box right now, just looking at that, is closer to this $1.06. It's about $1.06 to $1.08 without shipping or anything like that. No tax either on that. That's comparative. So I can buy really inexpensive, relatively range bullets to shoot for about the same price as I can make this premium cartridge, right? But I can match that performance, if I can match the white box performance for about half its cost, a little bit more than half, now we're onto something, right? So, but we need to know what to expect when we do that. We need to know how big is big when we talk about those groups are going to suffer. How much are they going to suffer? Is that an acceptable tolerance for me for plinking at the range or hunting even? Is that group going to open up so much that I'm really limited in my range that I can engage things? By the way, we're going to shoot all of this at 100 yards to get that comparison. This particular cartridge, I'm going to use the exact same loading method that I used, with the exception of I will use a mandrel for a little better precision on the neck tension. But I did shoot those in a video, and I'll put that link up there if you want to just check that out. I went to the range and fired those at 600 yards and was easily able to get sub 1 MOA at 600 yards in 5-shot groups. So we're going to use that same loading method. Like I said, we'll add the mandrel for the neck tension, and I'll cover that while we're setting up, why we're doing that and how that works. So stay tuned. I'll go ahead and cut, move the cameras around a little bit, and set up the reloading bench, and I'll go through loading a couple of these cartridges. I won't take you through all of them. That'd be pretty boring. But I'll take you through a few, just each of the steps along the way to produce the cartridge. And then I'll take a break, and the next time I am able to go to the range, I'll bring the camera along, and we'll attempt to get some pictures there. If that doesn't work out, obviously I'll label the targets very carefully and measure them up and bring them back, and we'll talk about them back at the loading bench.
I'm just running a universal decap die here. The idea is I'm just splitting up the 3 parts of my sizing die, and this will be the first part.
All right, we're about ready to size these guys. Let's start by, we're going to lube the Lapua. Won't take much of that. All right, so what we're going to do now is set up our sizing die. This is just a little loose. I'm going to start out just a little long, but the concept here is I've removed my decap pin. That's why we use the universal decapper, because I wanted to remove the ball, and I'm going to size my neck tension with a mandrel. But what I'm trying to do now is set this shoulder back just enough so it'll chamber in my rifle, but will be very, very close. So my target here is 16225.5, if we will. So I'm going to try to set it back about 2 thousandths. This isn't super critical as long as they're all the same. That's really the key, is consistency. But I want to be about 2 thousandths just for slop purposes, so it's easy to load. I'm still long. You'll notice when you start doing this that the case tends to grow. It gets longer as you're sizing it, not shorter. So you've got to keep adjusting. Usually you have to cam over just a little bit. The sizing die will actually be past the shell plate, turned down just a little bit. I'm at 1625, so we're almost back to where we started when we started sizing. We'll go ahead and snug that down because that's getting really close. And that last little snug will make a difference. So we want to do that each time now as we get closer and closer to our 1625. And 225 is what we want. And we're at 16220. So that's, within 5/10 thousandths. So that's what we want. We'll go ahead and run those, and we should have no problem feeding those into the rifle. They're all going to be set to exactly the same. Once again, so for comparing all of these cartridges, if you choose 1,000th, some people do, or you choose 3 thousandths. Some people do. That's fine. You know, it's your preference, but that won't make any difference on this testing because we're really looking for a difference between our standard and each of these variables. The next step is in our sizing process is going to be setting our neck tension. We haven't really talked about this on this channel yet, but the idea here, the concept is I'm breaking my full-size sizing die up into 3 parts. It's decapping, it's shrinking the body of that case and setting the shoulder back and shrinking the neck, and then the ball, when it pulls through, expands the neck back out to slightly smaller than the bullet, and that sets our bullet tension, or our neck tension as we call it. So now our case is ready to go, other than our neck is still oversized. It's too small. So rather than using the ball to pull up on that, and that can cause my shoulder to grow when that happens. That definitely causes my case to grow a bit. I've got to trim it more. But it's also not as uniform as a mandrel. So when we say mandrel, we're talking about a machined piece of steel, this exact diameter that I want. And that number is printed right here. What is that number? Well, if I measure, probably not using the calipers for this, I'm probably going something a little more precise than that. I'm going to measure my bullet, and I want to subtract around 2 thousandths. Some folks are finding that half of that, half a thousandth, at 5/10 thousandths, gives them the most accuracy. There's not much bullet tension, there's not much neck tension holding that bullet in that case. So if I'm running an AR style platform, or I'm hunting with it, I may want more. I may want 3 thousandths, right? So I can change these mandrels in half thousandths, 5/10 thousandth increments, and set that neck tension very precisely. It's going to have the advantage over the collet system, in that the collet system is very dependent. It's squeezing from the outside, so I'm measuring the thickness of my brass. My brass must be the same uniform thickness all the way around the neck. If it's not, then that pressure is also not going to be perfect. The other is that there's a little bit of slop built into this die, so this will self-align and center on the case, giving me a very nice more concentric version. There are folks that turn their necks. This is not that precise, right? But it is more precise than the ball for sure, and more precise than just the collet as far as concentricity goes. And I got to trim less, right? So the last bit to this, though, is there is another step. I've got to dry lube the neck of my case so I don't wear out this mandrel. This mandrel is not carbide. I'm sure somebody will be coming out with a carbide mandrel at some point. Today, that's either cost prohibitive or just doesn't exist. So I am lubing this with a dry lube. That's a downside and a positive. It's another step in the process, so that's the downside. The positive is I'm going to leave that dry lube inside the neck. When I go to set my bullet, it's going to have the same effect as dry lubing the bullet. Now, this is something that precision shooters have been doing for a very long time. So I also want to calculate that in my neck tension, and that's why I've chosen 2 thousandths. I have found I like 1 thousandths as far as accuracy goes, but I'm also got to transport these bullets around, and I don't want them moving in the case. No possibility that that's going to happen on the range or wherever I'm taking these. So I want some significant tension, particularly with a lubricated bullet. But it's going to come out of there very smooth, very concentric. That's the concept. So the die itself is just a simple die with a hole cut in it, and the hole is just so I can see where that neck, how high up that mandrel the neck goes when I'm setting up the die for the first time. If I overshoot that, I'll crush my case, and it'll cost me a die. I'm sorry, it'll cost me 1 piece of brass, right? The mandrels are changeable, so I can buy multiple mandrels and use the same die. I do use this on multiple calibers, and I do have a few different sizes for this 308. So that's what we're doing with this setup, and that's really the third step in what would normally be a one-step sizing operation. We are going to do it to all of our cases for uniformity. I'll shake up my dry lube and we'll run a couple through here. I just dip the neck in, take it up to the top. I get the length of time that I leave it up there can also have effect on that growing. So I want that to be fairly consistent. Doesn't have to be exact, but you can see I'm leaving that just for a few seconds. That gives it that metal a chance to just relax and adjust to its new size, right? Some people leave no time. Some people time it and run a specific amount of time. It really, in my experience, it doesn't really matter too much as long as they're similar times. You know, that's really the main thing. Don't leave it. Don't forget about it. Leave it and then go off, get a cup of coffee, and come back 10 minutes later. That type thing. All right, we finished sizing now, so next is trim. The case has grown all it's going to grow, it's shrunk all it's going to shrink. And so now we want to take these cases and probably going to trim them no matter what. But our max is 2.015. We are under that. We're at 20.12.5. But I want them all to be exactly the same. So my minimum trim is 0.005. So we're going to go ahead and trim them all to that minimum length. And if you haven't seen this setup and you're interested in it, I did make a video on this trim setup. I'll put that up there. How about that? Okay, so the other thing I'm going to do is I'm just going to take a rag, and while I'm spinning that, just take that neck lube off the outside of the case. Not going to hurt anything if I leave it in there, but if we think about that, if I don't do something to remove all that lube, you know, I could end up with a little bit of that in my chamber, which isn't going to hurt anything for sure, but it's going to be something I'll have to deal with when I clean. So just for the maintenance on the rifle, I'm going to go ahead and take that off. And I do have a little bit of lube on these cases from sizing that I'll have to remove too. Could I throw all that in my tumbler with my rice? Yeah, absolutely would work. I just prefer at this step, since I'm spinning the case anyway, might as well just grab a rag and take the rest of it off. All right, so we're going to get a measurement here just to see where they all are coming out to be. And that is exactly our 2005 that we were looking for. I don't know, if I let go of it, it goes to 06, so you can see that a little clearer. But that is our target. That's exactly where we want them. They're all going to be set to exactly that minimum. All right, we're ready for primers now, and we haven't really talked about primers, so let's talk about what we're doing today. I'm running CCI 200s. I'm going to run that through all 5 batches so that we'll have consistency. You may have a preference on a different primer, may think some are a little more accurate for your needs, may need something a little stronger cup because of the abuse you're putting it through. Just understand that they're all going to be the same, and we're comparing the size groups to each other, not their total size. So that's irrelevant. Let's be all honest also, finding large rifle primers right now, you may not be as choosy as you once were. Anybody looking at this in the future, hopefully that's not the case. but I paid $89 for this brick. When I figured the cost of my rounds, I put a dime on them. Just looking at them today, they seem to have gone back up a little bit. They were coming back down, they were available again, then they weren't, then the price went up. So, they're kind of all over the place. I really hope somebody a few years from now watching this video is in shock because they're paying $30 instead of $100, but I fear that might not be the case. So anyway, just for our calculation on our bullet cost, I've got a dime each, and we will be doing that on the press. We'll be priming on the press. Some folks like the hand primers. They think they have a lot of feel there. I'm not saying they don't. I find that I have a tremendous amount of feel setting them this way. It is my preferred way. There's a little less leverage involved. The auto feed seems to work very well. This is an older version. RCBS sells this today with a protective shroud around it. Anyway, I can feed 100 through here pretty quickly. That is our next step. We're gonna seat primers. I will be doing that by feel. I do have a lot of experience with this feel and feel very confident that I will be able to set them all very close. Primers are done. We're about to move on to charging with gunpowder. Now, before that, I do like to set up my sizing die, or my seating die, excuse me, my bullet seating die, so that I can go from gunpowder to seating a bullet, capping that gunpowder pretty easily and quickly without a lot of setup and moving things around, just so I don't accidentally spill some of that gunpowder that I was so careful to load. Don't have to do it in this order, but this is the way that I do it. So let's just talk about that real quick. There's a couple ideas about how to choose your seating depth. The option I'm going with today may not be your option, but once again, I'm going to apply it the same to all 5, so we shouldn't have an issue there. And what I've got is I call it my standard. It is this SMK 168 seated in a Lapua case. And I have found the lands on my rifle, and I've worked back. Now, one of the old school ideas was come back, 2/1000ths off the lands, something like that. I personally play around with seating depth for accuracy after I find my gunpowder charge for consistency. Some people think that that's hocus pocus, doesn't matter. I have found in some rifles it really doesn't. But in this particular one, seems to be very sensitive to that. Shoots very well just throughout the whole range, don't get me wrong, but it shoots significantly better at a particular seating depth. So that's what I've chosen. I am using an ogive comparator. This particular one for 308, if you're interested, I am using the 20, which matches about the same contact point as my seating die stem. So I've got that number. I've already figured it out. Once again, yours may be different. Your experience may vary. Let's leave it at that. So to set this up, what I'm going to do, I'm going to go ahead and lock my die in, and I'm going to turn out my seating stem. And when I bring my ram all the way down, I'll just bring that around until I make contact. Okay. Now my standard, I've set it about 5/10,000ths, half a thou, too long, right? And that way, when I set my very first case, I can make a fine adjustment if I need to. I'd rather make it a little bit shorter in the process than try to grow it. Once I've done that, if I've gone too far, it's kind of hard to come back out. So I like to start just a little long or just dead on it, and that's what we're doing here. So we'll be moving on to charging those cases. We'll go ahead and charge all of the same powder. I'll go ahead and seat those bullets, and then we'll change powders and do the second batch. Because remember, we're running IMR 4895, and we're testing tack. Let's talk about powder. All right, so I'm going to be charging with 2 different gunpowders today. So safety really dictates that I only have one out at a time, and the one that's sitting on my bench needs to be the one that I'm actually using. All right, so just keep that in mind as we go through this. A little bit of safety there. It is possible to mix these powders up, and while they are very similar in burn rates, that is not always the case, especially if I'm going from handgun to rifle or something like that. One powder only when I'm actually throwing charges. All right, so let's talk about the process that I'm going to use today. I'm going to use a hopper, and I'm going to use that to drop into the pan instead of the case. And one of our goals here is to see if we can use tack so that we can skip that step and we can go straight from the feeder to the case, because it does meter so well. But just for consistency's sake today, to make sure that everything's even, we've got a nice even playing field, I'm going to trickle charge this. So I'm going to throw it just a touch short. I'm going to use a scale. I'm going to trickle in the perfect charge within, really 3/100ths is about where we can get with these scales. These are very inexpensive scales. I am using 2 scales. I always use 2 scales. Sometimes I use the beam, sometimes I use the Rangemaster. Today we're going to be using 2 of the exact same scales. They should be within about 3/100ths of each other. When we achieve that charge within about 3/100ths, then we'll be dumping our charge into each case. We'll do that one at a time as we work through here. All right, I have my 5 loads, exactly as we described. I've kept up with that through pieces of paper while I was moving and keeping them in the right rows, so I created the right combination of things. One thing we've not discussed on this channel is how am I able to move all these test loads to the range and keep that straight through my target. So just want to cover that process real quick here. One thing I'm going to do is, I've got 50 rounds. I've got a 50 round box. So I'm obviously going to move 10 into rows 1 and 2. I'll move the next 10 into 3 and 4. One of my challenges when I'm at the range, I may reach in there and miss a row. So I like to use tape to cover the group that I'm not actively testing right now. So I can't accidentally reach across and pull one out of the wrong row. And in this case, I'll alternate colors as well. So I know I'm peeling off yellow, I'll be shooting blue next, right? Then the other thing I'm going to do is in my notes, I'm going to list what each one of those groups are, right? And I'm going to give that a number. So when I put my targets up, I just have to put 1 on my target. And I know that that's this control. And I'm shooting the control group. Then when I bring the targets back, I can measure them and it'll line up perfectly with what I'm trying to do. So that's what our organization is going to look like. My next stop will be the range. Once again, I'm going to attempt to do some recording there. Not really set up super well to get targets, pictures of targets while I'm actively shooting. I will try a few things and we may get a few of those shots. Certainly don't expect to get all 50. But who knows? Maybe we'll get lucky. But I will mark those targets. Like I said, 10-shot groups. I'll bring them back, and we'll talk about what we see. All right. See you at the range. We are live at the range today, and we're going to be proving our 5 different loads. I'm going to do that through a round robin. Got all 5 targets up, and I'm going to take one shot at each of the 5 and then go around. I do have some significant wind today, about 10 miles an hour. That's kind of gusting, coming and going, a little bit of an angle. So that's probably going to move our shots around just a tiny amount, which also kind of makes an important point. If that amount of wind is the difference between our groups, then there's really not much difference. I guess that's the point. So I've got a 5-shot magazine. I've got 5. What I'm going to do is I'm going to load the 5th round first, then 4, 3, 2, 1. So I end up with 1 at the top. My targets are numbered 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and I'll just shoot through those. So that's what we're going to do now. All right, back from the range. I'm going to put up the targets. I did put them in the computer and got some stats on that. But before I do, I know one of the questions that's going to come up is what exactly was I shooting? You know, am I out here with a $6,000, $8,000 gun? No, I'm not. Very inexpensive for what it can do. This build is a Tikka Action with a CTR 20-inch barrel, 111 twist. If anybody's curious, it is threaded. I have nothing on the end. It's sitting in an MDT chassis. That's an XRS. Not heavy, about 4 pounds or so. So it adds a couple pounds, but still very practical if you want to hunt with it, something like that. It would get a little heavy carrying it around for very long term, but if you do some short range hunting in the southeast, which is where I live, very, very effective at that. The glass on it is Aris. It does have a sunshade, that's why it looks so long, but the Athlon Aris is what that is. The bag that I'm using is an old military sock with nylon inside. Instead of rice, I am using some polymer balls, airsoft type setup. So that's what I'm actually shooting. I would say it's cost-wise a little more than a regular hunting rifle with a pencil barrel and a plastic stock, but not as expensive as a competition style PRS, that type rifle. It's nothing extreme. Okay, so let's talk about these targets for a minute. Like I said, I plugged them into the computer and got some data for you. I'll go ahead and put that data up right now. But basically what we're looking at here is groups 1, 2, and 3, that standard that I was talking about. Shot the worst group I've ever shot with that. And that's why I went ahead and shot another string at the very end, just to make sure there wasn't something wrong. When I made those bullets, I actually loaded 50, so I had 10 for the test. I had another 40 and I brought them. That's what I zeroed the scope with before we started. So to that point, I mentioned we had some wind, right? And I showed you a clip in there. I'm sitting 30-some stalls from the end, and the wind still was able to get to me, flip some pages on the book at one point. So it was gusty, for sure. I clocked at about 10, maybe going up to 15 a few times. Somebody did have a chrono sitting out that got blown over at one point. So, that's significant gust. But it was not steady, right? We did have about a steady 5 or so. I did make a correction for the wind, and that was I'm running a mil dot system, so I added 1 mil of windage, and that's group 1. You can see it's pretty close to center, just a little to the left, and that correction was to the right. So it was really about 1.5 mil, realistically, is what I should have had on it all day. So we did have wind, and we definitely had some gusts. Pretty sure that's what happened to that flyer on group 1, was just a little more wind than normal. Well, I ran this cartridge through my ballistic calculator, and what it said was at 5 miles an hour at 100 yards was worth 0.4 inches or so. At 10 miles an hour, it was worth 0.8 inches. All right, so let's keep that in mind, that wind that was moving roughly the size of our group, the entire thing. And that's why I wanted to shoot round robin, right? I knew those conditions would change throughout the day. As soon as I got there, it was very obvious that I was going to be there for hours. I made a 5-minute video of me being there, but it really took me about 4.5 hours to shoot those, to let my barrel cool down in between those shots. It never really got hot at all. It didn't get much past warm. I didn't want that to be a factor, right? But that did cause the conditions to move throughout the day. And if you look at group 5, for instance, every one of those shots was on the left side of that group at that time. They did grow a little bit more later as we went, but wind was definitely a factor. So that's point number 1. Point number two, let's talk about the size of these groups for a minute. So the first group, and some of you guys are MOA guys, some of you are inch guys, some of you are mean radians. So I've got it all here. You can take a look whichever you prefer. But basically, we shot 1, 2, and 3. We're pretty dang close to an inch. 4 got a little bit better when I changed powder. All right. So basically, what's that saying is my brass and my bullet really were no different. The TAC did shoot a little better than the IMR on Group 4, and Group 5 was also running the TAC, and that was the smallest group of the day, other than when I shot the standard, later, right? So, comparing those 5 groups, our extremes were 0.993 MOA. Actually, we had one over 1.027, just over 1 MOA. With our smallest being 3/4 MOA, basically. So we're talking about a 1/4 MOA from the very best to the very worst, with a wind that's going to be moving us up to 0.8, right? So I don't know. That, to me, you see the data, you make your own conclusions. My conclusion is that there was a nickel's difference between all of these. That's really the difference. When I look at the actual targets in person, blowing them up on the screen, kind of lose the idea that these guys are really small, right? All of my grids, by the way, are exactly 1 inch. If you want to get your own ruler out and do some comparison here. But if we're looking at our standard Group 1 versus Group 5, knowing that there's a little wind and I got a flyer out there on both of them, how are you going to choose one over the other? Really, I guess that's my point. Is I'd say they're way too close to call. I'm not going to say they're identical, but they're pretty dang identical. So, what did we prove here today, when we went through this whole mess? Well, I think what we proved is spending the extra money doesn't guarantee you're going to get better results. What the caveat to that is, that doesn't mean you can go buy the cheapest components and get the same results as the really good components. Keep in mind, I knew exactly what I was putting together for my inexpensive second. I chose Winchester brass. That's what I was picking up at the range, because I knew it was fairly consistent. I picked factory seconds as close to the bullet I'd already developed a load for, right? So trying to get those very close. In my second gunpowder, I've got a lot of experience with it, and I know that it performs very well in 308 with that type grain bullet, right? So I kind of hedged my bet there a little bit. So if you go out and you just pick up the cheapest powder, cheapest bullets, cheapest brass you can, you may not get this exact result, right? I was very careful about what I chose as my second. But I think what I wanted to prove to myself as well as you is that it can absolutely be done if you're strategic about it. I would say that these groups literally proved that it just doesn't matter between the components that I chose which I use. I'm going to get a very similar result. A 5-mile-an-hour wind will be a bigger change than the groups that I'm actually going to be capable of printing with this rifle and this guy driving it. All right? You may be in a different situation. You may have a better rifle. You may be a better shot than I am. If so, yeah, go ahead and spend your money. But for most of us, I think most of us would consider that pretty decent shooting, for average guys out on the range. I don't do this for a living, of course. This is just a hobby, right? So that's pretty decent shooting, and for whatever needs I have, all 5 of those loads are going to meet that need for me. That's the end result. So I did spend some time and some effort to put this video together. Of course, this is all free for you. I don't make any money on YouTube or anything like that. All I ask is that you give me a like, drop a comment in there, and subscribe to my channel if you would, please. I appreciate it. This is Old Man Taylor. Till next time.